Our first panel discussion will shine a spotlight on how the education and innovation sector can be leveraged to further advance economic recovery. I'm very pleased to welcome a distinguished diversity and inclusion, that would be Dr. Wendy here, champion for the academic director for the Diversity Institute at Toronto Metropolitan University, Professor Wendy Cukier, pronouncing that correctly, thank you, to lead these crucial discussions. And I will pass it over to you. Thank you.
Privilege of judging the pitches yesterday, and they were the best we've seen. So really looking forward to announcing the winners. And of course, all roads lead to Madame Augustine. Many leaders in this room, but she stands above many of them. And we're all grateful she made the time to come along with Minister Smith and others. I also wanted to signal Tiffany Callender, who's here today, who just joined us. Tiffany leads the Federation for African Canadian Economics. I'm on her board, but FACE is a really important, potentially transformational organization because they're committed to generational wealth for the Black community. Plus they have a big pot of funds to loan to aspiring entrepreneurs. So entrepreneurs in the room, make sure you hit up Tiffany. I'm here today to talk about education. And I think all of us in this room can agree that education is the foundation of everything. Whether we're talking about social inclusion, whether we're talking about economic growth, whether we're talking about the strength of our communities, education is the foundation. And yet we know prior to COVID that not all people had equal opportunities. And many of you in the room familiar with the work of Carl James, for example, which showed that Black students in the Greater Toronto area faced very significant barriers relative to others in terms of graduating high school, accessing post-secondary education. And it wasn't because of aspirations. 90% wanted to pursue post-secondary education, but only 50% thought that they could. And I know that the school boards and others are working hard to level the playing field, but what we found with COVID was it made everything worse, right? So those pre-existing inequalities that existed in the system were made worse by COVID. And we did a study with Environics, for example, that showed that the digital divide was not just a rural-urban issue. The research showed 42% of racialized families in the GTA, one of the richest centers in the country, could not afford high-speed internet. 42% of racialized families in the GTA had kids who were doing their homework on smartphones because they didn't have access to internet and computers. And think about it, what COVID did was accelerate the rate of digitization, more and more online learning, right? And at the same time, you have a very big segment of the population who did not have access to education, which was the foundation of what we will see over the next decade. So I wanted to take my minute at the podium to just underscore how important it is to invest upstream if we want to see equality at the senior ranks, whether it's in government, whether it's in the private sector, or whether it's in the nonprofit sector. But it's not all doom and gloom. I've been at Ryerson since before many of you were born. And while online learning and remote learning have been possible for more than 30 years, there were all sorts of barriers. In the same way, there were all sorts of barriers to telehealth online health or remote work, that COVID, the small glimmer of hope that COVID offered us was that organizations, whether they were government, the private sector, or universities, which are among the slowest to move, could transform themselves overnight and provide massive digital services. But again, this issue of the digital divide, right, is also exacerbated. So the panel that is going to speak today includes experts in all of these topics, and I'm delighted to invite to the stage Komian Sedsro, who is the Dean of the School of Management of UQAM, come to us from Montreal. Oh dear. Someone will go find her. Sandrine Promptep, who is from the School of Marketing and Entrepreneurship at UQAM and an expert in digitization in business, and particularly marketing, social media, and so on. And Professor Vida Shahada, who is the Program Head of International Development from our own Centennial College here in town. Please join me at the join me on stage. Do we have a mic for the panelists? Super. Thank you very much for joining us. I hope to have a really good conversation with our panelists, but I really also hope those of you in the audience who are with us may open it up for questions. So I did talk a bit about the challenges that COVID has introduced to the education system, but certainly there are opportunities as well that have been opened up. And I'm sure those of you who work in post-secondary institutions will agree with me that historically universities and colleges, universities more than colleges, have been pretty slow to adapt to change. And COVID really made things happen overnight that people previously said were impossible. So I wonder if both of you can just take a few minutes and talk a bit about your perspective, introduce yourselves more fully and your perspectives on why we should be having this conversation in this audience, which is particularly interested in prospects for African Canadians and the links with Africa. So please go ahead.
Vida, do you want to go first? Hello, everyone. Am I here on the mic? Yeah. My name is Vida Shahada. I'm a professor of international development, and I'm responsible for the program. The program is located within the School of Business in Centennial College. And I think this issue is important because, digital learning is important because this is how we were for the past 2 years, or a little more than 2 years. There were a lot of challenges. As a professor myself, I witnessed these challenges and I can speak of them. So learning is the most important thing for communities and societies. So I think this discussion is very important and timely.
Thank you, Vida. Hello, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. And my name is Sandrine Promptep. I'm associate professor at University of Quebec in Montreal, and I'm specialized in digital marketing and more specifically around all the issues regarding user centricity or citizen centricity. So all the systems that are actually centered around humans. And I believe this topic is really important, especially after the pandemic, but it is in general because we now live in times that are completely digital. And this is not going to stop. This is going to increase, right? So we are now living in times where those skills are completely necessary to thrive and to prosper. So yes, we have to actually differentiate the fact that you have digital tools for learning and you have distance learning. And this is what didn't go so well during the pandemic at our universities in general, because there was this massive panic of professors not prepared who had to, from one day to the next, switch their teaching practices, right? And come from regular lecture courses to online courses where they were not familiar with the tools, the Zoom, the Teams, and all those tools. So yes, it is very important to talk about digital learning because above and after the pandemic, what's important to remember is that we will continue to learn on a continuous basis. And so the digital tools that will allow us to develop those skills, be it in computer science, but be it also in community work, be it in language skills, the digital tools will allow us to better master those skills because they are transversal. They are useful in any domain. So that's the thing that we need to remember. So we have to move on with all those tools, better master them, and also better include them in our teaching practices to make sure that we can really leverage their power into education.
Such important points. And there are two things that really struck me with what you were saying. One is we know now that there are actually more digital jobs outside of the information communications technology industry. So it used to be that when we thought about digital skills, we thought about people who were going to work at IBM or Bell Canada or even tech startups. Now digital skills are essential, whether you're in retail, whether you're in finance, even agriculture. Agriculture is one of the fastest changing sectors in our entire economy, using all kinds of advanced technology. So such an important point. I think the other point, and I don't wish to speak badly of my people, but professors are among the hardest people to teach anything new. And I would be one of them, right? My head's full. I don't want to learn anything new. So what happened with the introduction of online learning overnight is a lot of professors just took what they did in the classroom and did it on Zoom. And if any of you have spent 3 hours listening to someone talk at you on Zoom, you can imagine what the impact of that was on learning. But as was mentioned, one of the things that we have started to understand, and some people have known this for many, many years, I mean, UQAM is definitely a pioneer in this area, is that there are some things that digital tools can actually do better than professors. With some of the online learning supports that are available, you can actually have more customized, more adaptive learning tools for people who can then learn at their own pace in a way that if you stick them all in the classroom, they can't. And that's why this issue of the digital divide is so critically important, because if we're going to take advantage of these new tools, we have to make sure that people have access to the technology, that it's affordable, and they have the skills to make use of it. And those are all things that come into the digital divide. Centennial has really been transformational, and I don't see your boss's boss here, but I think Dr. Fearon will be joining us at some point today, and he's really a pioneer in the educational space, but you work in international studies and development. Can you talk a little bit about what the implications of this have been for your work around the world?
Well, I want to highlight that the International Development Program in Centennial is a postgraduate program. So all our students, they should have a degree before they join the program. But also Centennial has undergraduate students who just came from high school. Also something about Centennial College, I don't have the numbers, but I know for sure that it's a very diverse college. So many students came from other countries. So the first thing that and here I can't blame professors from my position as a professor myself, I'm on their side. I would say March was horribly challenging for the professors. And Centennial has a center called, it's a center for teaching and learning. And they, as a professor myself, I saw that Centennial moved very quickly, maybe ahead of many other institutions, to train professors. So I remember in March, for example, I was online like for 12 hours. So there were learning with my colleagues online, and at the same time, when I go offline or when the workshop ends, I would go and practice different things. We introduced something called UCU, which is similar to Zoom. For me, it was easier. Centennial gave us the option to choose Zoom or UCU. I selected UCU because everything was in one place. Like I can start my class there, conduct my class there. So we were trying to like for big courses, and my program is kind of small with a high quality. So for big programs where we have 300 students, Centennial collaborated with a third party. So they create customized courses. So they include, like different type of interesting things other than PowerPoint. But the problem and the major challenge was many of our students, they don't have laptop, or they used to go to the college and there's computer labs and there's a library, but now they should have their own reliable laptop. So this was a big challenge. Right from the beginning, Centennial announced that they will provide 5,000 computers, laptops, personal laptops to students, like for free. It's like a loan. So, like we know who took this laptop, but they are not expected somehow to return it. I'm sure that they gave much more later, but from the first week or 2 weeks, they announced that if you need a laptop, come and pick it up. Of course, they arrange everything around security and safety at the time for pickup. So this is the first thing, but I remember, like I hear the students telling me, I don't have money to buy laptop, and then I don't have food. So which one, really many students, of course, that they have small jobs, and so they can't afford food. So for me as a professor, what should be done? Like, which one is more important, food or the laptop? Of course, food. So Centennial also created something like food banks inside Centennial, which was great. I remember that I wrote to the dean of students, and he told me, yes, I know. And they were working on it, okay? So because I hear from my students, they come to me and they say, I don't know what to do with my rent. So, and this will take us to the other challenges. So it's not just about digital divide, though I would like to speak about digital divide too, but there were many challenges. And then as a professor, when I hear these stories I have like, and I can't do anything. Like, I don't know what to do, but I understand very well. And then the stress, like it was very stressful for professors to be online for 12 hours. And I have to change all my material and my style of teaching. So all of these are challenges, like challenges for both. I can't blame the professors because they are also human beings who it was very stressful, and they have kids at home, some of them, or, you know, like all types, or someone sick at home. So all type of challenges, honestly, to the extent that I used to ask myself, which one is more important now? That my student learn this and that, or their mental health? Yeah, so
No, I think you raise a really important, well, two really important points. One is, you know, the issue of the digital divide is also economic. It's not just about technology, and the point
it's
that
economic, and it's related to certain communities and social groups. So you mentioned, for example, the racialized groups here in Toronto, and immigrants, new immigrants, and older people. It's all about intersectionality. So all of these factors come together: your income, your race or ethnicity, and I'm here using race to refer to racism, not that we are many races, but to refer to racism. I'm using it to explain racism. So ethnicity, immigration, age, gender, many girls, and we need to think about digital divide inside Canada, but also globally. Some countries have access to new laptop. Other countries, they have only the e-waste that we in North America sent to them, you know, like old laptops, broken laptops that we sent to them, shipped to them. So it's a global digital divide, and it's inside the country, in Canada too.
yeah, I think the second point that you make, which is something that we don't talk a lot about, is mental health, and not just mental health for students, but also mental health for teachers. And one of the things, as the minister is departing, I did want to give a bit of a shout out, because I do think the province of Ontario has invested very heavily in trying to make up for learning loss, in providing access to tutoring, but also other supports that students and teachers need. So some governments are recognizing the importance of investing now so we don't pay later. But I'll turn it back to you. What's the situation like in Quebec in terms of support for students through and teachers through this tough time?
Yes, thank you, Wendy. As you mentioned, the pre-existing gap, digital gap, was there before COVID was it, but I would say that it made it harder, especially for foreign students, international students. At our university, we have a lot of students coming from African countries and North African countries, countries in general who speak French, because we are a French university in Quebec. And so for them, those times were even harder because they were actually separated from their families, and most of them could not come back to their own countries. So it was really challenging times for them in terms of mental health, as you were saying, because they had no support. They were stuck in Quebec, Canada, and they had no financial support, and they couldn't return to their countries. So those were issues that added to the situation. But getting back to the digital divide, I fully agree that it's much more than not having access to technology. You know, the software or the hardware, this is one thing, but you also have to have access to the technological or the digital skills, as you were mentioning. Those are very important differences because you can have access to hardware, but if you don't know how to use it, or to software, and if you don't know how to use it, then it doesn't help. So that's one thing. But even beyond that, you have to have the interest of pursuing education. And that's also economic and economically linked to the fact that if you don't have the means to pursue higher education, then it is quite correlated with the fact that you're not very interested in pursuing them. So those are elements that have to be taken into consideration with the technological issues per se. I would say it's all part of the same issue. And you mentioned it very well, Wendy.
Yeah, I think, this conference is about economic development and social equality and globalization and how we build connections. And there's no question that in Canada, the educational system is absolutely fundamental, but it's also fundamental around the world. And I know many of the people in the audience have, in fact, we heard a lot among the entrepreneurs yesterday on their commitments to giving back to the countries they came from. And a lot of them are focused on education and schooling because it's recognized as the foundation. I wonder, I know that we're pressed for time. I wonder if there are any questions or comments from the audience or additional suggestions. We've talked about the, so table 19, can someone run over with a mic? Do you want to stand up? Do you have a big voice?
First of all, I want to thank you for your presentation, from educational, perspective. My question is that hearing from you, right, that you note that in our community, there are some gaps in terms of like student not having a chance to have the tools that they need, right? And I'm just wondering, like if you can elaborate a little bit further on specific, what are you doing specifically, like to support these students, to have access, to the means, what they need, like to things like, I don't know, from digital, like perspective, what are the things that they are need? Because now we identify the problems, but what is the solution?
Very good question. So what are the solutions? What are the top priorities?
Well, I can go first, and I would say that it's a very legitimate question because the solutions are not easy to actually put in place. They can be thought of, but to be put in place and implemented properly and effectively, that's a different story. But from what I read and from also some of the pilot studies that we tried at my university, we found out that to have support groups of students and have mentors coming from the same programs, but who are 1 or 2 years before, that helps a lot because they can actually mentor and accompany those students in these situations, and they learn from each other. And we all know that peer learning is a very effective way because it doesn't come from professors, it comes from other students, and they actually understand better the situations of the students. So I would recommend support groups with peer learning and mentoring. That's really something that worked very well at our university, especially during those challenging times where they were actually also acting as effective support, emotional support during those times. So that would be one of the solutions. We heard also that many micro certifications now are existing. So those certifications are available online, and most of them are free. They are offered by giant techs like Google, and so you can actually acquire those skills, let's say Google Analytics skills, so that you can monitor your website performance and optimize your website to make sure that, for instance, it serves the clientele that you're targeting in your business, for instance. So all those elements are actually approaches, strategic approaches to new forms of educations that the students can add to their portfolio. And those are free, if I can mention it that way. I mean, you still need to have access to the technology, but at least those are available online, and they do help to find jobs afterwards because they are very applied, very practical, and necessary in all fields now, all domains. So those are the two things I would put forth for now. And I'm not saying it's the panacea, but it's a start.
Did you
Yeah,
want
I want to speak about solutions. Dr. Sandrine, I was a client for people like her. She specialized in digital learning. I'm specialized in human rights. I see the solution is about ending the roots of the problem, which is digital divide. I see the solution first as solidarity to end inequalities that we were talking about. So my solutions comes from, first of all, I identify the problem a lot about as a problem of intersectionality, the digital divide. That some people are not equal, they don't have access to learning, softwares, etc. Like institutions did a lot of solutions. For example, they provide internet, they provide laptop, hotspots, etc. But the real solutions to end the digital divide, and digital divide, as we said at the beginning, is not just about learning, it's about health, it's about access to information, it's about access to the discussion about equality. So the solution is solidarity to end the roots of inequalities. This is my solution, or this is how I think about solution. To ensure that everyone has an income that help them to keep and protect their dignity. And of course, I don't think only about equality in Canada, but global equality, that we need to stop sending our old devices to developing countries because it poisons their children. So this is a solution in my view. It's a long-term solution, but like conferences like this, so we speak about social justice is the first step in this. In new immigrants, how do we receive them here in Canada? When we make promises for them before they arrive, and then how do we receive them in Canada? So I think about solutions from this side, but also I myself and the professors themselves, some of them, by the way, they didn't have access to the internet, or they end up paying more from their pockets to the internet to have more reliable internet. So even the internet companies should take part in the solutions and make more affordable internet for everyone. By the way, Canada is considered one of the countries that have the highest rates. I see some people are nodding their heads. Internet here is very expensive, even compared to the United States. Not saying that the United States is more equal, but internet is very expensive here in Canada. So part of the solution is that the providers make internet more available.
Thanks so much. And I realize there are more comments and questions. I think we're almost out of time, but yes, please,
I have
Your
a question.
Excellency. Here, please. Or
Thank you. Hello? Yeah, it's on. Yeah, good morning, Professor Wendy. Thank you so much for this program. We're all gathered here. I'm called Amelia from Uganda. We're all gathered here as friends of Africa. And what we're looking for are solutions also in Africa. We've talked about the challenges that we have here. Of course, in Africa, we have a number of challenges, you know, the digital divide and other challenges, electricity and all that. So Professor Wendy and the team of the academia, what plans do we have for the academia in Africa? What solutions do you think we can offer? I rest my case. Thank you.
Thanks so much. You know, I can talk just briefly about some of the work we're doing and then pass it on to others. But my colleague Ojulanki Gwanyama has actually won a number of awards from African institutions because about a decade, 15 years ago, he made a commitment to help build academia in Africa. He's trained well over 100 PhDs in Africa through the University of Cape Town and other institutions across the continent. And so I think part of it is supporting capacity building. I think the other thing that my university has done is partnered with a number of institutions in Africa and Kenya and South Africa primarily, also just opened up a facility in Egypt, I believe, where the intent is sort of reciprocal exchanges with a big focus on entrepreneurship. And it's a lot of people around the room may know this, but Africa actually has higher rates of entrepreneurship than we do in Canada. So we have lots to learn about some of the models that are used to support small businesses and self-employment. And I think understanding that it's a reciprocal arrangement rather than the traditional colonial arrangements is really fundamental. You know, we had a good conversation at the table about technology and technology adoption and how the context is so critically important. And as I said, I know we're almost at time, but I'd like to give the other panelists just a moment to talk about their views on reciprocity and collaboration with emerging economies, because as we've heard, Africa is one of the fastest growing economies in the world, and we have to be looking at it very seriously.
Yes, thank you so much, Excellency, for your question. I believe it's something that really needs to be addressed. As you were mentioning, at University of Quebec in Montreal, we have developed a few partnerships with African universities and North African universities. I know that we have a partnership with Morocco, Tunisia, one with Senegal, and I believe Mali as well. So those are very important, and they are much developed at the MBA programs. I'm in the business school, right? So I can only talk about business programs, but they are more developed at the MBA level because, as Wendy was mentioning, it focuses more on entrepreneurship, and so masters in business administrations are more targeted at those skills. So that's one thing, but I believe our universities and our governments should also, on a general level, beyond my university, facilitate the exchange of professors to allow us to invite professors from those universities who can come and spend like short-term stays in our universities so that we can collaborate on research programs and teaching initiatives. And that's something that's very complicated to do because of immigration restrictions, because of many other lack of support in terms of financial support when they arrive in Canada. That's something that is not, I believe, stressed enough, and we should invest more resources into those venues and solutions, I believe, and that would help both. As Wendy was saying, it would be reciprocal because we both need to learn from your experience and we could exchange information about ours. Thank you so much for the question.
Well, the International Development Postgraduate Program at Centennial is very diverse. I have many African students from different countries who, in fact, enrich the learning environment inside the classroom. So we don't have these stereotypes and misunderstanding and misconception, and I believe some of them are here in this conference. About African countries. So this is major things. And I believe it's very important to have the international development professionals who came from maybe marginalized countries or undeserved groups. So it's very important to have them lead development and decide how development should look like. It's very important. I'm more involved in NGOs than businesses eventually. And I know that the college also has partnerships with all countries. In fact, Centennial has some other campuses around the world in more than one country. But at least in my program, I think it's important to have students as professionals or future professionals to make decisions on how development should be in African countries. I have several students from Nigeria who educated us a lot about, the top concerns in the economy and so on. So I see my program's job is to collaborate with those future leaders in the sector.
It's a great point to end on. And all I'll add to what's been said is I think, the principles we have to recognize is that investments in education are investments in our future, whether it's in Canada or around the world, that the earlier you start, the better, because if kids don't have a good start by grade 3, they're already seeing limitations as opposed to opportunities. And frankly, one of my big projects right now is focusing on education as a human right and making it free. There are a number of universities, post-secondary institutions around the world that are collaborating to make university education free, and you can move that upstream as well. We have the technology. It's not that expensive. Where the barriers are, frankly, are the organizations and institutions rather than the resources. So I think the more we have fora like this, where we work together and think about solutions, the better. Thank you very much for your attention, and to the panel.
Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy.